In 1945, the first test of a nuclear bomb was performed. Since then, the US has performed over 1,000 nuclear tests. 23 of these tests were done on the islands of Bikini Atoll, which, until recently, have been inhabited. This video is about what happened to the people of Bikini Atoll. In 1944, the Americans claimed Bikini Atoll under their jurisdiction. They decided that these islands would be a great place to test their nuclear weapons, as they were fairly isolated. In 1946, the government assembled the locals and asked if they would temporarily leave the islands for, quote, the good of mankind and to end all world wars. After a long deliberation, they agreed to leave. In March, the inhabitants were shipped 120 miles away to Rongerik Atoll, which was one-sixth the size of Bikini, had an inadequate water and food supply, and the locals had the belief that the atoll was inhabited by evil spirits. The government gave them enough food for a few weeks, but because of the lack of food on the island, the supplies quickly ran out. The locals began to starve and become poisoned due to the lack of edible fish in the lagoon. After 2 months on Rongerik Atoll, they begged to return to their island. During this time, 2 nukes were detonated on Bikini Atoll. The Bikinians' king, Judah, was sent to Bikini Atoll to see the results. He assured his people that the island was still intact, the trees were still there, and Bikini looked the same. Over the next year, the people continued to starve on Rongerik. Meanwhile, the US was placed in charge of this area of Micronesia by the UN, and in the treaty, they promised to, quote, protect the inhabitants against the loss of their lands and resources. In May 1947, there was a fire on Rongerik, killing many coconut trees, worsening the food shortage. In November, they finally began preparations to move to the islands of Ujilang, with some Bikinians being sent ahead to build housing. Then, the US government decided to make Entawak Atoll a nuclear testing site, so they moved the Entawak people to Ujilang, leaving the Bikinians on Rongerik. Finally, after 2 years of starvation on Rongerik, they were temporarily moved to Kwajalein Atoll, where they were housed in tents next to a cement airstrip used by the military. At least they had food. After 6 months on Kwajalein Atoll, the Bikinians moved to Kili Island. This would be their new home. On this island, they would also starve, as their diet and lifestyle depended on a lagoon which the island did not have. This time, the government gave them a 40-foot ship to transport food to their island, which sunk in 1951. In 1954, the US government detonated the most powerful hydrogen bomb ever on Bikini Atoll. They were told that the wind was going towards inhabited islands, but they detonated it anyway, leading to fallout landing on several surrounding islands. In 1957, the Bikinians signed an agreement with the US government, turning over their rights to Bikini Atoll. In return, the Bikinians were given full rights to Kili Island, which they would often refer to as a prison. They struggled to find enough food on the island. There were also massive typhoons on Kili Island 2 years in a row, which made their struggles worse. After 20 years on Kili Island, the President of the United States promised the Bikinians they would be able to return home. The next year, the Atomic Energy Commission said, quote, there's virtually no radiation left, and we can find no discernible effect on either plant or animal life. Theoretically, all that was left was to return to the islands, but the US government removed their funding early, slowing the process. In 1972, the AEC announced that the crabs were still radioactive, so they shouldn't be eaten, prompting them to declare the islands unsafe. Over 25 years after leaving their home, 3 large Bikinian families, desperate to return, moved back to Bikini Atoll despite the risks. Over the next few years, more people moved back to Bikini Atoll. 3 years later, in 1975, during a medical test, they found plutonium in their urine and high levels of radioactivity in their food, deeming it, quote, too radioactive for human consumption. Robert Conard of Brookhaven Laboratories commented that these readings are, quote, probably not radiologically significant. The Bikinians filed a lawsuit demanding a complete scientific survey of Bikini was performed. This lawsuit would take 3 years to finalize. During this time, more discoveries were made. The amount of radioactive elements found in their food and bodies led to the DOE telling the people living on Bikini to, quote, eat only 1 coconut per day, and they began to ship in food for consumption. In 1978, The people of Bikini were evacuated due to the dangerous amounts of radiation. After the evacuation, their lawsuit finally went through, and the survey began. Since then, the people of Bikini Atoll have sued the government, and theoretically received compensation. However, the government has not yet given them the money they are owed, and even with the money, it is not enough to fund a radiological cleanup of the atoll. What happened to these people is horrible. They were made to leave their home, being told they would be able to return. They starved on horrible islands for years, and when they finally returned home, they contracted cancer and were made to leave because of what the government had done to their homes. I would like to end this video by saying how insane it is that I've never heard of any of this before. I started this video as 5 random stories about nukes. The only reason I looked into Bikini Atoll is because it's canonically next to Bikini Bottom. The only thing I knew about this island before making this video is that it's next to where SpongeBob lived and that it was the site of nuclear testing. When I started my research, I found that it used to be inhabited and decided to look into it. I found a lot and decided that this was more interesting. If you want to learn more, I linked bikiniatoll.com in the description. Thanks for watching.